Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews out of the deck text. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Jumpstart, Kels Fight Fixer. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. Other ways you can help support the channels with my Patreon. For as little as $1, patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, while higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to them down in the description too. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Kels is a 4/3 as a warlock with menace for 2 generic and 2 black. However, since she has a blue-black hybrid mana symbol in her text box, she has a blue-black color identity. For 1 generic, you can sacrifice a creature to make her indestructible until end of turn. This is amazing not only to protect her from dying from damage or destruction, but also as a sacrifice outlet. And for that blue-black hybrid mana I just mentioned, you can draw a card whenever you sacrifice a creature. This makes Kels an amazing commander for Aristocrat strategies, since she's a sacrifice outlet and an engine piece in the command zone. In order to make the most of her ability, the deck has plenty of sacrifice outlets to not only trigger her card drawing ability, but the rest of the cards in the deck with triggers that care about dying or creatures being sacrificed. Phyrexian Altar and Ashnod's Altar are possibly the best ones since they're completely free to activate. The Phyrexian one is the better of the two since it provides colored mana. That means that you can sacrifice a creature to it and get the mana needed to pay for Kels' triggered ability to draw the card. To a certain extent, Phyrexian Tower can also be used as a sacrifice outlet for mana, but unfortunately you can't use it multiple times since it requires tapping to activate. That being said, it still provides the mana to pay for Kels' triggered ability while also giving you leftover black mana. As for the rest of the mana acceleration in the deck, we see that much later. Viscera Seer is another free sacrifice outlet, and what's great about it, besides its being super cheap, is that you can use it to filter the card you're going to draw with Kels or whatever other draw ability that triggers on a creature dying or being sacrificed. Speaking of which, Priest of Forgotten Gods, Yawgmoth Thran Physician, and Erebos Bleak-Hearted can all draw you a card by sacrificing creatures. Priest of Forgotten Gods also serves as a way to make opponents sacrifice a creature and 2 life too. But later on, we'll see more on making opponents lose creatures. What's great about the Priest is the math. You sacrifice 2 creatures and get 2 black mana. That's 2 Kels triggers that you'll be able to pay for. So for tapping the Priest and sacrificing 2 creatures, you can essentially draw 3 cards, all while pinging the table for 2 life and making them sacrifice a creature. Yawgmoth is also amazing in the deck since he can pick off mana dorks or other utility creatures with his -1/-1 counters. Keep in mind that it costs life as well to activate his ability. We can also use his second ability to proliferate, which isn't incredibly relevant in this particular deck, but it is still useful in certain situations. Erebos is similar to Kels in that his card drawing ability is on a trigger. Fortunately, it costs no mana to activate, but you do have to pay 2 life, so keep an eye on your life total. That being said, he still has a built-in sacrifice outlet that can also be used to take out creatures by giving them -2/-1. So Erebos is even more similar to Kels in having a built-in sacrifice outlet as well as a way to take advantage of it. CDC Undead Vizier takes it a step further by tutoring for any card in our deck. So while these card draw effects are great, Zombie CDC can get us anything we need. If there are no creatures we're willing to exploit, we could just exploit Zombie CDC herself. Although that won't hardly be the case since the deck has plenty of sacrifice fodder that we're gonna see soon. Attrition is a sacrifice outlet that doesn't pussyfoot around when getting rid of creatures, unlike Yawgmoth and Erebos. If the creature isn't black, then Attrition will destroy it no problem. You do have to play 1 black mana each time though, but that's still a small price to pay to destroy any non-black creature. Brine Shaman does one better by not even letting the creature reach the battlefield. It might be costly at 3 mana, but it doesn't require the Shaman to tap to activate. So as long as you have the mana and sacrifice fodder, you can prevent opponents from casting creatures, particularly their commanders. We can also tap Brine Shaman and sacrifice a creature to give a creature +2/+2 until end of turn. While not the main reason for running it in the deck, it can still be used to pump up Kels. Keep in mind that Kels is a 4/3 with menace, so it is quite possible to eliminate an opponent with commander damage, especially if we're getting rid of their creatures. But more on that later. Whisper Blood Liturgist helps in reanimating any creature for the price of 2. Unfortunately, we do have to tap it down to activate it, but it doesn't require any mana or life to do so. We can sacrifice any 2 tokens or creatures that reanimate themselves in order to recover any creature that's more important or anything we might want to combo into, like reanimating Zombie CDC and just have her exploit herself in order to tutor for a card each turn. As for the sacrifice fodder I keep mentioning, the best ones are Reassembling Skeleton, Gutter Bones, and Nether Trader, with the best one being Reassembling Skeleton. It doesn't have any timing restrictions like the latter 2 do, we just pay 2 and reanimate it whenever we want to. The others are still good, Nether Trader in particular. Since we're constantly sacrificing creatures, for 1 black mana it can return to the battlefield. Sanitarium Skeleton does something similar, but unlike returning to the battlefield, it returns to your hand. This makes it cost 4 each time we want to cast it, but at least it doesn't have to be 4 mana all at once. That being said, it does pair incredibly well with Yawgmoth, since we can also use it for his discard ability, because we can then return it to our hand afterwards. Mortis Strider and Endless Cockroaches on the other hand go to our hand automatically and for free when they die. 3 mana might be a bit steep, but these creatures are amazing sacrifice fodder. They die and then return to our hand. This provides an insane engine for never being out of a sacrifice outlet, just like with Reassembling Skeleton and Sanitarium Skeleton. Ophiomancer and Bitter Blossom are some more sources of near limitless sacrifice fodder. Bitter Blossom might only take the Fairy Rogue token during our upkeep, but Ophiomancer makes a snake token each upkeep so long as we don't control a snake. That means that at the end of each turn we can sacrifice that snake token for value, since we'll get a new one the following upkeep phase. As a bonus, the fairies can fly and the snakes have Death Touch, so they're not some vanilla tokens neither. Neither Kraken provides said vanilla tokens, but in an amazingly synergistic way, providing quite the engine in the deck. Whenever we draw a card, we pay 1 and it gets a +1/+1 counter on it, as well as creating a tentacle token. Whatever reference you want to make of swarming opponents with tentacles, I'll leave that to you without passing any judgment. In any case, the deck is constantly drawing a ton of cards. Paying 1 generic each time not only pumps the Kraken, making it a huge beater and blocker, but also provides sacrifice fodder and a chump blocker. Further along, we'll see it in action when I explain some of the engines in the deck, but with what have we seen so far, you should already get the gist of the insanity possible thanks to it. Solemn Simulacrum is great at ramping us a land when it enters the battlefield, but it also draws a card when it dies. If we're able to recur it multiple times with the reanimation effects in the deck, we can get a lot of mileage thanks to it. Same with Burnished Heart and Wildfield Scarecrow. These have built-in sacrifice outlets, so they're great on their own to trigger Kels and others. Burnished Heart is definitely the better of the two. By being able to consistently reanimate it or recurring it will get us incredibly ahead as far as mana is concerned, since the lands go onto the battlefield tapped, unlike the Scarecrow which go to our hands. Aura Thief and Thalakos Deceiver are great at stealing things. Aura Thief is pretty straightforward though. It dies and you steal all the enchantments on the table. This is insane in a multiplayer game. Thalakos Deceiver requires a bit of work, but at least it can sacrifice itself to its trigger. Having Shadow means that it will most likely not be blocked, allowing you to sacrifice it and steal a creature. Grey Merchant of Asphodel is another great tribute for sacrifice, since it has an enter the battlefield trigger. With so many black permanents in this deck, devotion is going to be very high by the time this hits the battlefield. Then, if we want to reuse its ability, we can sacrifice it for value and then reanimate it later on. Now, throughout discussing the sacrifice fodder, I've mentioned reanimation. Although this is not a reanimator deck, it is an Aristocrats deck. Whisper Blood Liturgist isn't the only reanimator here. Havengoul Lich is an amazing card in this deck. It allows me to cast any creature from the graveyard for just 1 additional mana. If that weren't enough, it gains all the activated abilities of that creature until end of turn. So you can keep recasting creatures like Gary, Zombie CDC, Thalakos Deceiver, etc. to get even more value from them, or from ramp creatures like Burnished Heart and Solemn Simulacrum. Speaking of ramping, we can also sacrifice our creatures for even greater acceleration in mana. Pitiless Plunderer and Sifter of Skulls get us mana generating tokens when our creatures die, while Revel in Riches does so when opponents' creatures die. What's amazing about Sifter of Skulls is that the Eldrazi Scion tokens it creates have a built-in sacrifice outlet for themselves. So when you sacrifice them for mana, you trigger Kels as well as anything else that cares about creatures dying or being sacrificed. And you're still getting that colorless mana from them. What I love about Revel in Riches is that it gets you a ton of treasure in this deck. Not only that, but if it survives until your next upkeep, there's a high likelihood of you winning right then and there, especially when you combine it with Pitiless Plunderer. We make opponents sacrifice a ton of creatures with this deck, so unless it's dealt with, you can win the game. And even if you don't win the game, you're still getting a ton of treasure from it, from Pitiless Plunderer especially. To a certain extent, Black Market can also get us a ton of mana from our creatures dying, but we only get black mana and only at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase. Since it's with the number of counters it has on it, this is another case where proliferating with Yawgmoth comes in handy. We can also get mana the conventional way thanks to Talisman of Dominance, Arcane Signet, Dimir Signet, Soul Ring, and Mana Crypt. Blue-Black doesn't have many ways to actually ramp lands, but with recurring Solemn Simulacrum and Burnished Heart we can make do there. However, these mana rocks don't require any hoops to jump through. We can also maximize the mana our lands give thanks to Crypt Gas and Nirkana Revenant. Every time we tap a swamp for mana, we get an extra black mana. That means that if we tap a dual-typed land for blue mana, we get black mana too. In fact, we can make all of our lands swamps thanks to Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. Combined with the Gas and Revenant, it makes all our lands tap for an extra black mana or 2. Cabal Coffers obviously pairs with Urborg this way, giving us a ton of black mana in the process. We can further use Urborg to our advantage with Lake of the Dead. We can sacrifice a swamp we already tapped for mana in order to get 4 black mana from it. This can go a long way if we need a quick burst of mana. We can also get a ton of mana thanks to Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. Most of the permanents in the deck are black, so this can tap down for a ton of black mana, also blue mana if we were to need it, but black is the most common color here. Now, recall that I mentioned that Kels and the creatures similar to her aren't the only means of drawing cards. There are simply ways of drawing cards off of sacrificing creatures with their built-in outlets. We can still draw cards indirectly off of creatures dying or getting sacrificed thanks to Dark Prophecy, Liliana Dreadhorde General, and Smothering Abomination. Smothering Abomination only triggers when the creature is sacrificed, but it does have a built-in sacrifice outlet that triggers during our upkeep. However, most of the times our creatures are dying is because we sacrifice them anyways. Dark Prophecy and Liliana, however, trigger when any of our creatures die, regardless of how they did so. Dark Prophecy is not a you may ability, so keep an eye on your life total when comboing off. Liliana is also useful in providing a sacrifice outlet where the entire table sacrifices 2 creatures. This is amazing for us and a pain for opponents. The only downside is that it costs 4 loyalty to activate. Skull Clamp lets us draw 2 cards whenever the creature is equipped to dies. Fortunately, all the creature tokens created in this deck are 1/1, so that's an easy way to draw 2 cards. Same with the skeletons that can reanimate themselves. Even then, we can just equip this to any other creature we want to sacrifice in order to get the 2 cards that way. Rhystic Study is available to us for having access to blue. Yes, this is a very annoying card, but we can't only rely on synergistic ways to draw cards. Rhystic Study is straightforward, and a lot of the time players won't pay the tax on their spells, so we can potentially draw a ton of cards between turns. Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower are included as a means to keep our fat hand when we're really drawing into a ton of cards. Being a 2-colored deck means that the tower won't color screw us, and being a land doesn't take up a slot in the deck. Alhammarret's Archive is amazing here since it'll double each card we draw except for the first card of our draw step. Doubling those draw effects really help us dig through our library, not just for our combo pieces and engine pieces, but for our responses as well. We'll see those soon enough. As a bonus, it also doubles the life we gain, which, believe it or not, is quite relevant, especially considering that a lot of cards have effects that require life to activate or take life away when triggered. Thanks to Zulaport Cutthroat, Blood Artist, Sir Conrad the Grim, Vindictive Vampire, and Falconwrath Noble, not only are we weaponizing creature death, but we're also gaining life from them with it too, which is quite helpful in counteracting any life we lost. In fact, these provide the main win con of the deck. When added in the many engines of the deck, they win us the match by draining opponents of their life, sometimes slowly and many times all at once. Another important aspect of these Aristocrat engines is simultaneously dealing with our opponent's board states. Dictate of Erebos, Grave Pact, and Butcher of Malachor are insane here and can easily keep your opponent's creature free. So not only can you drain the table with the previously mentioned suite of life drain creatures, but you can also swing in with your creatures unopposed. Some of our effects also trigger when opponent's creatures die, so these also help in maximizing the effects of those cards. When dealing with commanders, Oubliette and Imprisoned in the Moon are amazing. In order for your opponents to be able to use their commanders, they have to get rid of those enchantments, and many decks will have a lot of trouble doing so, especially mono red and mono black ones. Since these enchantments don't just leave opponents with a creature, they won't be able to sacrifice it to our stack's effects to send it back to the command zone, which is definitely a plus. Tragic Slip is great spot removal since it will almost always give a creature -13/-13. Even though opponents will mostly be sacrificing their creatures, which bypasses Indestructible, sometimes you need to deal with an Avacyn or Blightsteel Colossus, so it's great to have just in case. Either way, Damnation simply wipes the entire board. We might be facing against token decks or other horde decks, and we might not have enough triggers to deal with their board that way. We can also probably recover better from it than those decks can. In any case, an overloaded Cyclonic Rift gets the job done. Bouncing everything back to their hand isn't as good as making them sacrifice their own creatures, but it is an instant, so we can use it in response to an attack or at the end of the turn before ours. We also need ways to protect our combos and engines, so removal shouldn't be our only responses. The decks running Fierce Guardianship, Pact of Negation, Swan Song, Negate, Counterspell, and Mana Drain, which is a pretty decent suite of counter magic. If we're able to win the game after assembling one of the many engines or are about to combo out, then these very cheap counterspells are great since we don't have to keep much mana open to cast them. We can also recover any of them with Mystic Sanctuary. Being a land means it takes up no slot in the deck, and being an island means that it can be tutored for. Same goes for Witch's Cottage. This helps in getting a creature we need onto the top of our library to draw into later on. These not taking up a slot in the deck are ideal. They do need to enter the battlefield untapped though, which shouldn't be an issue since this is a 2-colored deck. Even though I have been mentioning these combos and engines of the deck, these are built with many of the different pieces in the deck and aren't necessarily exclusive with certain cards. For example, there are plenty of cards that draw us cards when a creature dies, plenty of free sacrifice outlets, card that drain the table for life when creatures die, generating mana, etc. So similar engines can be built from different pieces. So I'm just going to demonstrate some examples of some possible engines that can be built with the deck. However, know that there are dozens more. Let's see what we can do with Nader Kraken, Ashnet's Altar, and Smothering Abomination. Once we draw a card, we can pay 1 mana to pay for the Kraken's trigger, creating the Tentacle token. we sacrifice the token to Ashnet's altar, generating 2 colorless mana. This triggers the Abomination, drawing us a card, which in turn triggers the Kraken. We can use one of that colorless mana to pay for the trigger, getting another tentacle token and also making the Kraken bigger. We're now at the beginning of the loop. Notice that this generates infinite colorless mana, infinite sacrifice triggers that are also infinite death triggers, and an infinitely large Kraken, and we can draw as deep into our library as we want. That infinite mana can be used for whatever we want as well. The infinite death triggers too. We can wipe the board if we had Dictate of Erebos or something similar in play. We can also win the game by draining the table with Zulaport Cutthroat or something similar. Another interesting engine is with Sifter of Skulls, Pitiless Plunderer, Nether Trader, and Nels. We can sacrifice the Nether Trader to Nels, creating an Eldrazi Scion token and a Treasure token. We can sacrifice the Eldrazi Scion for mana, triggering Nels, the Shade, and the Pirate. With the Treasure token we already had, we can pay for Nels' ability to draw a card. With the Pirate's trigger, we create another Treasure token that we can immediately sacrifice to pay for the Shade's ability, returning it to the battlefield. We now have 1 colorless mana left over to start this loop all over again by sacrificing Nether Trader to Kels with it. This will allow us to dig through our library as deep as we want while also providing infinite sacrifice and infinite death triggers, which, again, can be used to power any part of the many other engines we can build with this deck. These two were just some examples of what can be possible with this deck. If I were to list and explain all the ones I've come across as well as the ones I can think of from the list, this would be like a 2-hour video. The rest of the deck is just the lands. The deck's running all 8 fetch lands, Command Tower, Morphic Pool, Faded Pools, Sunken Hollow, Underground Sea, Watery Grave, Ancient Tomb, and Temple of the False God, as well as 6 of each basic snow-covered land. As with all my deck techs, if you don't already own an Underground Sea or aren't playing on Magic Online or Carcatrice, you can simply swap out the Underground Sea for Underground River and it really doesn't do much. The land is in no way of utter importance for this deck to work. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Kels Fight Fixer. What I love most about this deck is the many different ways you can pilot it thanks to all of its pieces. You can build a bunch of different engines that can do everything from wiping your opponent's board of creatures, to digging through your entire library, to generating infinite mana, to killing the entire table by draining all their life, or any combination of these all at once. You also don't have to go infinite with these combos, since a lot of them are just for value that can go infinite if the pieces just so happen to be there. But you can still do a lot even if you don't reach infinity yet. So this deck isn't straightforward in the slightest, but it's complex in an enjoyable way. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.